Hello, it's Peter Wright and Kathleen Beauvais with another episode of Health Declassified. And this is the show where we explore the truth behind health and wellness. And we do that in two ways. One, by bringing you really interesting expert guests, and other episodes where we do a deep dive into something. Today, we are privileged to have a guest with us, but let's not jump the gun. Let's first introduce our co-host, Kathleen. Hi, Kathleen. Back from vacation, back on the job. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Peter. Thank you so much. And thank you also very much for tuning in to our show. We so appreciate having you. And as Peter mentioned, we have another special guest with us today. We are so privileged to welcome Jaclyn Downs to the show. Hello, Jaclyn. How are you?
Hi, I'm really, really well. Thank you. And thank you so much for having me here.
Jaclyn is a functional nutrigenomics consultant at the Nutrigenetic Research Institute. She has been researching epigenetics and nutrigenomics, which is how nutrients and stressors or toxins affect the functioning of our genes and cells. So, we're going to take a deep dive into this. So, bear with me, stay with us here. We're going to explain all of this, where Jaclyn will explain. So, Jaclyn, first, out of the gate, can you please explain in some detail what epigenetics and nutrigenomics are?
Sure. So we are all born with the DNA that we will have from the first breath of life until our last breath. So, as far as we know, that DNA blueprint does not change. But what can change is the expression of our genes. So, epigenetics literally translates to above the genes, above genetics. And so, there are things that we can do or things that we are exposed to that will affect the expression of our genes, or a lot of people say turn them off or turn them on, but in my book I say it's more like a dimmer switch. So it's not that it's such a black and white issue. There, it could be many different shades in between for how much a gene might be turning on or turning off. Now, nutrigenomics, so every single gene in our body makes an enzyme that makes something happen, right down to producing our earwax and the consistency of our earwax. And so those enzymes that the genes have the blueprint for producing require nutritional cofactors. So it's just like certain engines need specific fuels, right? So certain enzymes require certain nutrients, whether that's vitamins or minerals or other, types of proteins or nutrients. And so if we have a genetic variant that can, which is a SNP, or some people call it a mutation, that can alter that enzyme's activity. It can speed it up or it can slow it down. But for instance, if it slows it down, we can bring in more of that nutrient to help compensate for that enzymatic insufficiency. So you can really help to bypass your genetic variants, but also environmental toxins and medications, pharmaceuticals, and stress, just emotional, physical stress, all also affect the functioning of our genes and our genetic expression. So it's not just about nutrients and nutrient deficiencies, it's also about the toxins that throw wrenches in our metabolic pathways and our enzymatic reactions.
Hmm.
Hmm. Wow. So sounds like a highly complex field. Jaclyn, what motivated you to get into it and start working in these fields?
Well, I have an academically published book, and in the beginning of the book, I sort of talk about the evolution of how I got to where I am today. But my father was a nutritional biochemist,
Ah,
and so I've always had an interest in nutrition. And I say in my book that I can confidently say that I was the only kid in the mid '90s in junior high that knew what a probiotic was, because it just wasn't common back then,
hmm.
the early to mid '90s. And so I always knew that there was more to optimal health and nutrition than the information that we were being fed.
Right.
And then I wanted to have a job where I wasn't on call anymore, because prior to having children, I my previous career was as a birth worker. So I worked with a
Oh, okay.
midwife, and when I was working with that midwife, I it was in my early 20s. I became starkly aware of how many fertility challenges there were. And this was primarily with the Amish and the Mennonite communities that lead much slower lives. And if they were having high incidences of infertility and miscarriage, then it was only going to be worse in the non-plain communities. And since I was in my 20s, none of my friends were talking about miscarriages and, not being able to get pregnant, right? We were all trying not to get pregnant at that time. And so that really made me aware. And then I realized, because the midwife I worked with was very nutrition focused, that's actually how I met her, because she worked with my dad. I saw how nutrition and addressing certain things and toxins brought these women back to have healthy pregnancies. And so once I had my own children, I didn't want to be on call to attend births anymore. So I got a job being as a research assistant for a local naturopath. And this was probably almost 12 years ago. And I was hired to research a single gene called MTHFR. And that quickly escalated into other genes in this whole methylation pathway, and then other pathways intersecting that pathway. And it turned into what is now today the functional genomic analysis software and test kit that I use, which looks at hundreds of thousands of genetic SNPs now. And I giggle because people still are learning about, their genetics is a hot topic right now. It's here to stay. And I almost titled my book MTHFR as a gateway gene, because it is usually the first gene people hear about, and it introduces them to the concept of that our genes can affect our health, and that our state of our health affects our genetic expression. But there's so many more genes to discuss far beyond MTHFR. I'm not discounting the importance of MTHFR, but we can't just focus on that single gene, because no functional gene works in isolation.
All right. Well, that brings me, that's a great segue to my next questions. How exactly do you go about testing people to determine what epigenetic or nutrigenomic factors are affecting their individual health?
Okay, so most of the genetic tests out there on the market today have a predetermined list of genes and SNPs. So a SNP is a single nucleotide polymorphism. It's basically like if you have a gene and it has all these different ladder rungs, some of the ladder rungs are a little bit different than what the main population has. So it's just a space in the ladder. And let me see how I can word this. You can edit this out, right? I just totally... Sure. Can you just ask that question again, please? I'm so sorry. I think I went a little too far into describing it.
Not a problem. Not a problem at all. Here we go. We'll pick it up again here.
Okay.
So how do you go about testing people to determine what epigenetic or nutrigenomic factors are affecting their individual health?
Okay, so it is just a simple saliva test.
Is it? Oh, wow.
Yep. Yes. Yeah. No, if you're just testing for isolated genes, like some people get a blood test to just test for MTHFR, which I think is so limited. In my book, I say that's like seeing this 23,000 piece puzzle and thinking that you know what it looks like based on two pieces. You can't really tell. There's so many things that affect MTHFR upstream and downstream. So it's a simple, you spit in a tube and you mail it to the lab, and then the lab analyzes it. And then I take that analysis, which just looks like mumbo jumbo to everybody, and I do my interpretation. Now, my interpretations are a bit different because I don't have a predetermined list of genes and do you have it, do you not have it, and do you have one copy or do you have two copies. I take into consideration your personal health history. I have a very detailed intake form. I ask about your sleep, your poop, your dental history, skin issues, dietary preferences, what's worked, what hasn't worked, your level of stress, all of that. And then I use that along with your symptoms and your goals and your diagnoses to inform where in the software I want to look. And the software does have, it's very nuanced. And so that allows me to find the areas that are noteworthy to mention to you in my interpretation. And then just because you have a genetic variant does not mean that it's expressing.
Mhm.
So pairing the genetic testing, which is not diagnostic, it just provides a framework and an understanding and sort of like tells you where in the haystack you would likely find a needle, right? It could be
Okay.
one place, it could be multiple places, but it sort of hones in on the area that could be causing the root cause issue. But when you pair that with functional lab testing, like a urine organic acids test, which is one of my favorites, then that is a snapshot of what's currently happening in your body metabolically. So you can pair it. So you can say, oh, okay, well, I have genetic predisposition for having some bile issues and I'm not using my fats very well. But if you take a urine organic acids test, there are 8 markers that actually are a snapshot of what's happening in your body currently and will show if you have fat utilization issues and if so, to what degree. So are those genes likely expressing? So it's really good to have the in-depth intake form and the genetics and the functional lab testing and even non-functional lab testing. You can tell a lot with just some good old plain blood work, right?
Mhm.
And so using all of those things, I'm like a detective, and I provide an ultra personalized interpretation as opposed to a lot of these other companies that are just doing automated AI generated. If you have this genetic variant, then we're going to plug in this information. And a lot of times that information is very contradictory or just very confusing.
Okay. Wow.
Maybe. Yeah,
Interesting.
because I've had, there's these, well, 23andMe, I don't know if Ancestry.com does the same testing, but they'll test for any genetic predispositions and so that's probably what you're referring to, these generic or AI generated softwares that can kind of pinpoint what kind of maybe genes you would have or not sure
It's the
I'm the one
report.
who's not expressing this correctly now, but
Oh, and Kathleen, you did the long word so well right at the start. I'm glad I didn't have to do all this.
Great. That was a great pun. I loved it. Yeah, so the big companies, they look at a limited number of genes and SNPs.
yeah.
So they usually show like one gene might have 2 or 3 SNPs, which are like little. It's like if you copy a recipe and you
Hmm.
accidentally write teaspoon instead of tablespoon,
Right.
Yep.
anytime you pass that recipe on to a friend or family member, they're going to copy the incorrect recipe, right? It's not going to be the original. They're going to be copying off of your copy. So that's essentially what happens. And you can, so I said, they might only look at 2 SNPs for a gene when sometimes there can be dozens, if not hundreds. And
Okay.
so I like the company that I use because it looks at every SNP, whether it's clinically validated or not. Whereas all the other companies only look at clinically validated SNPs. And like I said, that's very limiting. And clinically
Mhm.
validated just means it has the study and the research behind it. And so you can really tell a lot the more points of information you have, the more of an informed decision that you can make about your health and how to proceed with action steps.
Right. And
Okay.
and just to take it one step further, so for instance, you might get a reading that says you have a predisposition to say something like macular degeneration.
Mm-hmm.
And then you would step in and then basically say there are things that you can do to mitigate or help perhaps
Yeah. So
prevent.
those health reports that those big companies provide,
Mhm.
they're kind of fun, but predisposition for macular degeneration doesn't get to the root cause, right?
Right.
And it's not just one gene. So macular degeneration is a condition of what is called oxidative stress. Oxidative stress is damage to the cell. It's
Mhm.
damage to the cellular structure. And it's also damage to the information that cell contains.
Mhm.
And so the things that I look at in my genetic testing is what is causing the oxidative stress. Is it a lack of antioxidants, right? That antioxidants are what fight free radicals that cause oxidative stress. Antioxidants prevent antioxidant or oxidative stress, excuse me.
Right.
And so that goes with any kind of condition, chronic condition, any kind of thing that ends in itis is really inflammation, which is based in oxidative stress. So looking at your genes, you can see if it is that you are not producing enough antioxidants, or if you're producing so much inflammation. Some people are just more genetically prone to having their immune systems be really trigger happy. And so they're just firing off all these inflammatory messengers at the tiniest little insults. And so because of that, they're going to need more antioxidants. And so we can see where in those pathways that imbalance would be. And so you can use like targeted precision with supplements and modalities and food and stuff like that to mitigate something like macular degeneration. You'll know which antioxidants to take. So I don't look at like carrier status or things specifically related to conditions like that. Like I said, the functional genomics are genes you can do something about. So they're not diagnostic. So macular degeneration, I would never say, oh, you have this gene that equals macular degeneration. No, I look at it as your body is experiencing oxidative stress. So let's figure out what's causing that oxidative stress. So I could have 5 people come to me with macular degeneration, but have 5 different routes of action, targeted routes of action, because everybody's genetics are different.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. So if I can just pick up on that, using macular degeneration as an example, would something like, I have, and I'm not asking this for a prescription for myself, but using myself as a case history, I have minor, not serious macular degeneration, and I'm taking supplements which have kept it stable. But with what you've just been talking about, oxidative stress, I was born in England and went to Africa and lived in the tropics from a child until 20 years ago. So would excessive sunlight from living in the tropics on eyes that were conditioned by genetics to live in a temperate zone in Europe, could that cause oxidative stress, or am I stretching this beyond credibility now?
Potentially that does make sense. And it's the same thing as like if you gave Inuits a tropical diet and had them be eating tropical fruit and oranges, their body would not thrive because evolutionarily they did not evolve in that climate. And so, yes, I do totally, what you're saying resonates with me, and there is a very good possibility, but there's also other factors as well. But, but yes, that is an interesting point that you bring up.
No, thank you. I just triggered from what you were saying that maybe that's something in the background. Anyway, this is not about me. This is about you. So I got a question for you, which is a slight departure from what we've been talking about, but it's an extension of it. So it's my observation that people in the first world are less healthy and less content than they were 60 or 70 years ago. And I believe that has to do with probably epigenetics more than genetics. What's your opinion on that, Jaclyn?
I agree. I do tend to agree with you. Our soils are just more depleted because of, monocrop agriculture and spraying of things. So first off, even organic food is not as nutrient dense as it once was. But the levels of stressors, and I think the biggest ones are environmental toxins. Our livers were not designed to handle the amount of toxins that we are exposed to on a daily basis this day and age. And so in my book, I say that I think it is just as important, if not more important, to have a good detoxification ability than it is to have a really clean diet. Or I mean, like a nutrient-rich diet. So basically, detoxification trumps nutrition this day and age. because even people that eat
Interesting.
healthy diets are still exposed to the toxins that still cause
Yeah.
things like cancer and chronic diseases and stuff like that. And then also just a lot of emotional stressors. We're just the age of information, right?
Hmm.
We are bombarded with images and information and input 24 hours a day almost, especially if people do fall asleep with the TV on. And then there's the whole, it comes down to cellular health as well, where there's so many things that are causing oxidative stress, whether it's living in a moldy environment, or there's studies showing about electromagnetic frequencies affecting our cells. And
Hmm.
so, it's all drops in the bucket, and everybody has their genetic weaknesses and genetic predispositions. So some tolerate living in mold better than others.
Hmm.
There
Hmm.
could be four people in a home that is really moldy, and one of them is bedridden, and the other one has allergies, and the other two people are completely fine.
Sure, sure,
Right,
sure.
right. Actually, I'm also interested in with respect to diet. So, what epigenetic or nutrigenomic factors help some people on a vegetarian diet, while others seem to thrive on an animal-based diet?
I could nerd out on this, and I've done some posts on Instagram about this, because there are certain genes that, like, for instance, perfect example, there's a gene called your BCMO1 gene, and that is what converts plant-based beta carotene into the bioavailable form of vitamin A. Bioavailable
Hmm.
just means that's the form that the body needs to be able to use it, right? It's the form that the body uses. And so for people that don't have any genetic variants, they can convert beta carotene, which is only found in, plants and, orange foods. Basically, people think of carrots and pumpkins and apricots and that kind of stuff. Um, if they don't have any variants, they're likely converting a good amount of that beta carotene into retinol. And retinol is needed for so many things in the body. It's needed for proper iron regulation. It's needed for nighttime vision. It's needed for skin health. It helps our body fight viruses. But if you have a lot of BCMO1 variants, you're not converting that beta carotene into retinol. And so you could have an excess of beta carotene, which actually is linked to issues in itself, but then you're deficient because your cells aren't able to get the retinol
Hmm.
to execute these functions. And so that's a perfect example. And there's also my favorite one, which is one of the genes I mentioned in my freebie that people can get on my website, of my big three most important genes that I think are the most impactful. There's a gene called PEMT. And so choline is found in plants and animals, but our bodies, it's called a conditionally essential nutrient, because our bodies do make choline, but depending on your genetics, some people are going to need to get extra from diet and supplementation. And so again, if somebody has a lot of PEMT variants and they're only getting choline from a few plant-based sources of certain genes that really explain why a vegetarian diet will really benefit somebody, but it'll be a train wreck for somebody else.
Right,
Oh,
right. Okay.
fascinating. So, I mean,
Yeah.
it sounds like before anybody decides what kind of a diet they want to follow, this kind of testing is really would be beneficial, because that's how they know how to basically feed their bodies to optimize their own health. And so it's so in I have this conversation with Peter all the time about diet. It is so it's difficult because there's so many different diets out there. There's the vegetarian, there's the carnivore, the keto, whatever. There's just, and everyone has an opinion about diet, but not everybody thrives on one specific diet.
Yep.
It's because we're so different. And
Hmm.
having this kind of testing, I think, would benefit everybody. Because that way
Yes.
they know, you know what, I'm a vegetarian, but maybe I should be. Or I eat more animal-based products and maybe I shouldn't be. So it's so individual. So yeah, I
Yeah.
absolutely see the benefit in this for sure.
Mm. Yeah. So, Jaclyn, one that fascinates me is the blue zones. I read about five, and someone else said to me, no, there's two more, there's seven. I don't know, whatever. But if you look at those, they're in different parts of the world, people of different ethnic backgrounds, all sorts of differences, and yet the common denominator is they have a much higher percentage of centenarians than anywhere else in the world. So we're talking about populations with different genetics, and yet they do things, or they have diets and activities that keep them living longer. So what can we learn from that in North America?
What can we learn from the blue zones? My
Mm,
takeaway from the blue zones is, first off, a lot of those are smaller communities where people
yeah.
are really valuing and honoring their traditions. And also, they feel that sense of community.
Mm,
And so that is very, very important for your well-being. And, you know, if you feel connected and loved and have that connection, that is going to reflect in positive genetic expression, right? So it'll keep those quote unquote bad genes turned off. But also, a lot of those communities are not eating highly processed foods
yeah.
that are in our modern societies. Not saying that those aren't modern societies, but again, they're sort of keeping more to their local heritage and their
Hmm.
roots. So I think that those are the two biggest things, is that they're just eating more how similar to how their ancestors ate, and
Yep.
also they have that sense of community. And you know, I've seen a lot of interviews by these centenarians in these blue zones, and they all seem like really lovely, chill people to be around. You know,
Yep.
they're just way more easygoing, and they don't let life, you know, get them, just keep punching them down. You know, they sort of roll with it, and they find the silver linings and stuff like that. And so I think that that says a lot to being stressed out and worrying and putting too much on your plate, and all of those, you know, overscheduling yourself and stuff like that.
Right. And there's another common factor, and that's exercise, right? Most of them, one report I read says they don't consciously exercise, but their lifestyle dictates that they do exercise. They either walk every day, or they do manual work. They ride horses, some of them at 100. The documentary Kathleen and I watched recently, there was a guy of 92 pitches up for work on his motorbike, right? A little motorbike down a gravel road, and he's coming to work in a garden, vegetable garden. So yeah, which brings me back to my earlier question about why has health and contentment deteriorated in the last 60 to 70 years. That is sort of parallel with the last migration from farm to town in North America, isn't it? And in fact, most of the Western world. That 70 years ago, a much higher percentage of the population still lived either on farms or in rural areas, in villages, whereas now it's a very small percentage. So has that got something to do with it too?
Oh, I absolutely think so, because it's also, if you live on a farm, you're outside more, your feet are on the earth more, you're,
Yeah.
you know, you're grounding. But to add a little extra element onto that, you know, 70 years ago, most people were born at home.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of trauma that happens at birth. And a lot of people, you know, they have these traumatic births, and people think, oh, well, you know, a baby doesn't remember being born. Well, maybe not cognitively, but energetically, there is that trauma and that fear and everything. And so that potentially could be playing into the, as Eckhart Tolle says, you know, the pain body that we carry around, and that in informs or shapes how we respond and react to everyday situations and people around us.
Sure. True. True.
So, Jaclyn, you actually specialize in helping couples with infertility issues. So, how would you approach that?
So most people in the conventional medical model are told that IVF or some sort of assisted reproductive technology is their only choice.
Right.
People are not made aware that there are so many things that should and could be done prior to starting IVF to improve your chances of a
Hmm.
successful IVF. IVF has a very low success rate, and it
Hmm.
is tens of thousands of dollars per cycle. And so the body, and this is what my whole entire book is about. It's called Enhancing Fertility Through Functional Medicine. using nutrigenomics to solve unexplained infertility. And I put unexplained in air quotes because unexplained just means that you're not identifying and addressing the root cause of the issue. Just forcing hormones to be in specific ranges to achieve an outcome of a live birth is not addressing the underlying reason that the body's innate wisdom has temporarily stopped or halted mating ability. Mm-hmm. Because it either feels that now is not a safe time, or now is not an optimal time, or there is not enough energy or nutrients to grow a healthy human. And so the body will halt mating ability because having a baby is not essential for staying alive, right? So it's going to rob Peter to pay Paul for those resources. So if you address, causes of oxidative stress, which oxidative stress, our eggs and our sperm are extremely vulnerable to, because again, the body's going to use resources for staying alive rather than nourishing an egg and making healthy sperm. Mm-hmm. And so, identifying nutrient deficiencies, getting toxins out of the body, calming the nervous system to put it in that rest, digest, repair, reproduce state, as opposed to the fight or flight. These are all things that will help to bring the fertility back online. And should you need to go the route of assisted reproductive technologies, your body is going to be in a much more receptive state for that to be successful.
Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Well, we are running short on time, Peter, but I do know you have another question you'd like to ask.
Yes, Jaclyn, this is what we call our burning question that we ask our expert guests. And I apologize you didn't get advance warning of this one, but hopefully you can do something with it. And that's, with your background and your experience and all the work you've done, what's one thing you could advise our audience, particularly in the first world, North America and Western Europe, to start doing today to live healthier, happier, more contented lives? Is there one thing you can think of?
The first thing that pops into my mind is to just try to eat organic when you can, when it is financially feasible for you to do that, and also for what's available to you. That's a good place to start, because we don't have control over what's in our air and our waterways, but we do have control over what we bring into our homes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Jaclyn, how do people contact you? And one more time, tell us about that book and how people can get it.
My book, which I have right here, is called Enhancing Fertility Through Functional Medicine. And you can get that on my website or on Amazon. And my website is just my name, jaclyndowns.com, JACLYNDOWNS.com. And I'm not super active on Instagram, but I'm working on it. And my Instagram handle is at Functional Genomics.
At Functional Genomics.
Got it. Great. And for our audio listeners, all those details will be in the description, and a bit about the book on whatever platform you are listening to this episode on. So from my side, Jaclyn, thank you so much. I find it absolutely fascinating. There's tons more. I could do another half hour with questions that I'm interested in, but our time is out. So thank you. Thanks to our audience for listening. And to our audience, quick one. We've had another expert guest, a brilliant, fascinating guest today. To make sure you don't miss out on our future guests, hop onto our website, healthdeclassified.com, and sign up for our newsletter. We only send you one email a week, and then you're in the picture of who's coming in the next couple of weeks and in the future. That's it for me. Goodbye, everyone, and thanks again, Jaclyn. Back to you, Kathleen.
Thank you again, Jaclyn, and thank you all once again for tuning into our shows. And until next time, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.